Hello and welcome to Seattle University School of Law webinar series, May 19, 2020, Who Cares? Compliance and Risk Under the CARES Act. I am Linda Hiemer. I'm the Senior Director of Graduate Law Programs for Seattle University School of Law. If at any time you want to learn information about this program or have any questions and want to discuss your professional goals, you can call me directly at 206-398-4268. And I do look forward to hearing from you, and I thank you for joining us today. On our agenda, well, we're going to talk about a hot topic today, the CARES Act. And we will be welcoming momentarily our guest presenter, Ali Higgs. Then we'll tie the CARES Act and some of the challenges we're facing globally back to our program, whose motto and brand is compliance with a conscience. And we're going to talk about how we can put that into action. Then, briefly at the end, we'll talk about next steps related to this program and some key deadlines, and we'll have a short Q&A. If at any time you do have questions, please share them in the question and answer box or leave a chat. I'll try to manage those throughout the process and ask Ali as we move along. Otherwise, we will have Q&A at the end. So, I'd like to welcome Professor Higgs. Ali, take it away.
Well, hello. Thank you, Linda, for having me today. Just so I can introduce myself. So I'm a senior compliance consultant, and I primarily work with trust companies. I also work with non-depositories, banks, credit unions are my primary clients. And so I actually helped with a course as part of the program this past year. So I have a long history. I don't know if you were here during the original, when we were just talking and doing the sound check, but I have a long history with Seattle University. I graduated from there in 2002 with a degree in business administration with a focus on finance. And then I worked for 5 years and went back to law school. So I'm alum of the Seattle University Law School, and I graduated in 2010. So this is my 10-year anniversary of being out of law school. And like a lot of compliance and regulatory folks, maybe started out as an attorney or went to school in business, but for me personally, I don't practice law. I work more in this consulting regulatory world. I'm doing more compliance and consulting work on strategic initiatives and how the law works and how to best comply, which is very interesting and very germane to the topic today, which is the CARES Act, which I'm sure you've all heard about. And it's, it's been quite interesting being on this side of trying to consult financial institutions. So Linda, had asked me to come and talk about the CARES Act, and there's kind of 4 key players to look at when you're thinking about the CARES Act, and those are the enactors, the facilitators, the recipients, and the enforcers. And so the enactors are, Congress, the president signing the law, and that all happened fairly quickly. It was signed, CARES was signed into law on March 27th. CARES 2, which was the second piece of it, was signed into law on April 27th, and then CARES 3 should be coming out, I would assume, in the next week or 2. So thank you for moving to the next slide. So yeah, it was emergency legislation, and the primary pieces that I wanted to talk about today were the stimulus checks, also they're called EIP payments, and then also the payroll protection. Those are the loans. So the reason why that was interesting and what Linda and I had talked about is because financial institutions are uniquely positioned to get all of this money out to people. That being, individuals. It also means businesses. It means getting funds out, in all manner of ways that this stimulus was going to happen. It has to be pushed through the financial institutions. So from my perspective, it was a lot of information coming all at once, and it's still coming. So there's always, every day, there's some new guidance, there's some new rules to look into. new headlines that are coming out, lawsuits. That's where we're at in the process. So in the originally it's like push the legislation through, but I will say they put a lot of thought into this, but there's always things that are never going to be caught. So there's some other issues like garnishment, and then all of these fraud issues that are now kind of coming up to the surface now. And there's a lot of other ambiguities that we can talk about. So I guess we could go to the next slide here. So yeah, so what I was mainly going to talk to you about today was the facilitators and the Department of Treasury. So Steve Mnuchin is the head of Treasury. And actually an interesting thing about him is that he was on the board of a financial institution, I believe, in California. So he actually is very knowledgeable about financial institutions, like how they actually operate. So that's actually extremely helpful in the sense that he's going to know what the issues are going to be from a very general sense of how banks and credit unions and other financial institutions, the little blips and problems are going to have in getting some of this money out. And so on the deposit side, so deposits, what we'll just say, so banks, financial institutions, credit unions have two sides of the house. They have deposits and they have loans. So the deposit side, they were going to have to receive a ton of ACH payments. And when I mean a ton, that was $500 billion. So in checks and ACH, $500 billion was going to go out to 140 million taxpayers. They were going to push all of this money, the Treasury was going to push all this money out to the institutions through these ACH payments and checks. Well, that's what banks do. They take ACH, they're receivers, they send out ACHs, so that's a very common thing, but it was just going to be this huge push. And so they were pushing out all this money, pumping all of this liquidity into the system or into people's deposit, bank accounts. There's all kinds of issues. But if someone doesn't have a bank account, it was based on all of the information from 2019. So one of the issues that came up was if someone used like a TurboTax and got a loan on their refund, then money was going to some institution that they had never really used, but it was, so there were all of these hangups with these ACH payments. Another thing that came through with ACH is some institutions weren't quite prepared for that, and they weren't really sure what this money was, and it was coded a certain way. So those are some of the ACH issues. On the check side, lots of problems with checks. Fraud, people just printing out fraudulent checks and taking them to banks. Also, a lot of branches aren't open, right? So people are doing a lot of remote deposit capture, so taking a picture on their phone, and maybe they're going to deposit that check, but maybe they'll deposit again at another financial institution. So compliance people were scrambling to figure out how to capture all of the risk issues involved with these ACH payments. And there was a lot of good guidance that came out about, okay, well, you can actually, as a financial institution, you can actually go and look at that number of check, and you can put it into a system and see if it's legitimate. However, that doesn't really solve for the problem if somebody, takes a picture and then takes another picture and sends it to two institutions. A lot of issues there. Endorsement. How are you going to have those checks be endorsed? What if somebody died? How does that going to happen? Somebody moved. It's going to the wrong address. A lot of issues with the deposit side. But the bigger piece right now is, and what, those deposits have been issued over, I think, about 8 weeks. So as you know, it was $1,200 for adults. You could potentially have $500 for each additional child. So this money's coming to these people's pockets, and those issues and kinks have kind of been worked out because it's become so regimented. As far as people breaking into your mailbox and maybe stealing the check, those are other issues. But the deposit pieces, or the EIP, the economic impact payments piece, seems to be quiet. I haven't heard a lot of issues there, but I have heard more now that we're going into the PPP loans, which is the Payment Protection Program. The idea behind this piece, so the deposits are for individuals, the PPP loans are for all of the small businesses. So the system was, or actually in their wisdom, they used an already existing loan program for small businesses. but these loans are going to be forgiven, which is very interesting and uncharted territory, really, in a lot of different ways, a lot of different issues there. So with the PPP loans, that got pushed out too. There was, the first round had $350 billion in loans that were to be made by the financial institutions. Now remember, the SBA doesn't necessarily do the direct lending. You have to go to a financial institution, get the loan, they get the money from the SBA. See, there's all these different things that have to happen, but it's through the financial institution. So what are the issues with that? Well, a lot of institutions don't do SBA lending. A lot of credit unions, particularly banks, they've never done an SBA loan. So they've got to learn all of these different things. And there is a lot of guidance for SBA lending and how, you make a loan and all the documentation you need. Another piece of that PPP loan is that you need a lot of information about, the payroll. So the idea is that the money should be used for your payroll. So if you have a small business, you should keep paying these people on their payroll, and you can't really use the money for other things. The rule is 75% to payroll, 25% for other expenses. And so one of the bigger issues that's going to kind of come out of this whole situation is, did everybody use their money for payroll? Because if they didn't, then it might not get forgiven. So guidance just came out this last weekend. It was actually not necessarily guidance, but it was the application to have your loan forgiven. So the day you get your loan, you have 8 weeks, and then the loan can be forgiven. So those are kind of the nuts and bolts of the issues that came out with the PPP loan. There's guidance being issued. When it was first enacted, there was guidance like every day. And so these institutions, these banks and credit unions and people that have never made an SBA loan in their life are trying to help their customers, help their clients get all this funding that's available to them. And it was a real push, and it was very interesting. Did you have anything you want to add, Linda, to that?
Actually, yes, it's a question. I'm trying to picture this where you're saying words like emergency and institutions that had never worked with SBAs. And I picture a frantic workforce, but also so many people working in these institutions are working remotely.
That's right.
So when you're talking about compliance and risk professionals and analysts like you, whether you're internal or you're working in a consultancy, you say guidance came out over the weekend, guidance came out. How on earth can someone be so agile? And these are remote teams trying to address a lot of these situations in real time with real people and a heck of a lot of real money. So can we really capture that in real time? This is a remote situation, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great question. One of the things that's sort of unique, well, I don't know if it's unique to financial institutions. That's my area of expertise, right? But financial institutions are required to have pandemic planning. They are required to have a lot of risk management and thought process around something like this or a natural disaster, to be able to take things off site. And so and it's interesting because you really didn't hear a lot of squawking in the news or anything about financial institutions having trouble doing that. And that's because they plan for it. So, okay.
Thank you. That's, I didn't, and you're right, you don't think of that. People have been talking about, do you have a pandemic plan in place? And we never thought about some of the challenges that come out of institutions also being prepared for, whether it's a man-made or natural disasters. And that so many people say, no one ever planned for this, but we plan. So planning has been in place, and it's people like yourself, the compliance and risk professionals that help with those processes and procedures.
That's true. I will say that there were I did listen to one CEO say, well, we got to step one and we kind of had to, readjust, right? So they had the plan. Is the plan going to work? Maybe not, but they at least had a framework to kind of go off of. So kind of also being nimble. But yeah, a lot of financial institutions were able to do this because, especially the smaller institutions that were able to speak to a human. You know, if somebody came in and said, hey, I want to get a PPP loan, they were, you know, there's been some anecdotal evidence that that was better to, you know, the smaller institutions handle this changing environment, and you're not dealing with AI. You know, maybe some institutions that had AI worked fine, but, you know, I've heard a lot of good things about people that were actually able to speak to someone in this, you know, unique environment.
Oh, and AI, you're referring to artificial intelligence.
That's right.
More of the fintech or more global institutions.
Yes, yes. So there were, just quickly, there was a real issue. For instance, this is related but not related, but like Wells Fargo is a good example. A lot of issues with Wells Fargo. First of all, they were not allowed to lend as much because of they already had regulatory problems, and so there were a lot of upset customers that couldn't get their loans through. And part of that was, I think, system wide, and then also they weren't actually allowed to lend, and that was lifted at some point early on.
So, and yeah, not so. So again, a lesson learned here is what we may see. We're in nowhere near the debrief phase, but when you're not hearing a lot of squawk, that's a very good sign. But I bet 6 months from now, 6 years from now, when what we're experiencing in real time is the textbook or the case study in programs like ours, we'll be talking about people who had a sound compliance department, risk, and had plans and processes in place, really helped their clients the most and helped this process along.
That's right. Yeah, I think people that kind of have a risk focus and can work with kind of the environment better off. To put it into perspective, just really quickly, as far as the facilitators go, I wrote this down, but the Small Business Administration, it normally handles a program of about $28 billion a year. So last year they did $28 million in loan development, and then this, you know, in the last 2 months they've done 669 billion. You know, that's what they've been approved to do. So you're pushing, you know, this a ton of loans through this portal, and so there have been issues, I know, about uploading these loans and getting the loans funded and all this kind of stuff. But from the perspective of a former regulator and somebody that worked in government, it's sort of amazing that it's even getting done and that they were able to roll this out so quickly and use an entity that already kind of does this work. They didn't have to stand up a new program. So in a certain way, kudos to the government to figure that out. Whether or not it works, I mean, we'll have to see how it all plays out, right? But I think the idea was sound. I think we can move to, we're running out of time already, so we can move to the next slide. So recipients, you know, like how I talked about, the individual stimulus checks went to individuals and married couples, and then the PPP was going to small business. So you might have seen some headlines around, you know, Shake Shack and some other bigger corporations that were able to get PPP lending or funds, and they were able to return those funds. It kind of made big news, but there, you know, there was a rush to go out and get some funding. And I think some of the bigger companies that realize this is horrible headline risk, maybe they could have used the funding, I don't know. And maybe they actually technically were approved and they could meet the, you know, whatever the SBA rules are, but it actually is really a bad, as far as risk goes, you don't want to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So, so there are issues, there are lawsuits right now as far as who got the funding, particularly because the rule says that you were to get first come, first serve on the small business lending. And some institutions were prioritizing, yeah, you're already an existing customer, you're first in line. Oh, you're a big loan, we'll do you first, you're, you know, and so the courts have already ruled in favor of that first come, first serve. It might not necessarily be, even though it's in the rule, I think there's more to come on those issues as far as who got the loans, how those were processed. But if you look at the SBA rules, they really kicked it down to the institutions to decide who should get the loans to some degree. And I think, I'm thinking ahead, but I think a court might agree with that, but I don't know.
Oh, you're thinking ahead. See, again, someone who's trained in law and policy and can really see beyond, as they say, you can see the forest for the trees. That's critical. But you raised a couple interesting points, and some of the images we wanted to capture in this slide was the recipients don't necessarily have compliance and legal departments.
That's right.
And you also mentioned these lawsuits. Are these lawsuits that are being initiated by government agencies, by nonprofit advocacy groups?
I think they're just, I know there were some cases out of Texas, particular to the small business, first come, first serve. I don't know the genesis of who that is. It might just be someone that was upset I don't know their backstory. I know there's some cases in California that have to do with specific lawsuits, varied and sundry reasons of unfairness of who's getting funding and who's not, and or that the rules say this, and you have to remember these rules were like issued in a couple weeks or something. Somebody had to write them, and actually the issues are issued in an FAQ format, which is even more interesting. So the rules are FAQs, and so now there are some lawsuits saying, well, the FAQ says this, but this bank did this. So we'll have to see how those play out over time. Overall, though, I would say that the funding is not out for PPP. There's still money in the pot to be had. And I think what we're going to move to now is the next slide, which I think talks about more of like the compliance pieces and keeping records. And the point here is that I think there's we're in that like space of the money's been dispersed and it's being dispersed, but how is it going to be forgiven? So folks really needed to be counseled when they got these loans. Hey, you might not get your money back, because if you spent your money on other things besides payroll, then you are going to have to repay this loan. So all manner of interesting issues. So as far as complying, that goes for people who receive the money. And then also any financial institution that is making these loans, they need to make sure those certifications that they are, borrowers just saying, I certify that everything I say is true and correct. The SBA did come out and say anything under $2 million, you can rely on that certification. Anything above $2 million, you better make sure all of those certifications are correct. And if not, there's going to be problems. And so that kind of leads us into the next slide, but we can talk about, which is like more about enforcement and some of the issues that are going to be coming around on these issues. So there are some in the law, in the CARES Act and everything, there are these pandemic response accountability committees, a special inspector, and then we also have congressional oversight. But for right now, the real enforcers in the environment that we're in right now is going to be the DOJ, FBI, state and local. So for instance, here in Washington, we had a big problem with false employment security, people putting, I think it might be connected to the Equifax breach. If they have your social, your home address, you can put all that information in and try to, overtake your identity and get some money. So we're going to have law enforcement more on the ground handling these fraud issues. And I think as time goes on, it will trickle up into more of these broader oversight commissions, and reports will be written, and potentially people might go to jail, especially the people that I think there was a person in Texas that tried to get, some huge amount of, I want to say it was in the millions of dollars of loan. It was completely fraudulent. Everything that they had provided to the financial institution was completely bogus. And so, there's going to be a lot of enforcement in that direction going forward as well. So that's all I really had to say, because there's only 5 minutes left, unless there's anything specific you wanted to go over.
That's great. Yeah, the time, we do value people's time, but those who can stay on, happy to have a little bit overage too. And when we're looking at some of these enforcers, we're remembering that the best thing, if we go back to our previous slide, is how to avoid having a visit from these enforcers is to do the right thing up front, to not think about the short-term goal or be cluttered with a panic, because so many people, whether you're an individual or in business, it's hard to be looking 6 months from now when you have immediate needs, and not having guidance, not having support, either whether there be consultants or people. It's easy to make errors in your application or to fudge a little bit because you hear on the news that other people are doing it. So I think adequate record keeping, not relying on the government when you said, but you have my form, because again, the government, so many people are in the same mode, scrambling, a lack of resources, a lack of information. So it's really up to us, whether we're individuals or small businesses, or we're working in the compliance and risk field, to be above board and be honest and make changes and be candid if there's been a change in your situation. And even if ultimately the enforcers come knocking on your door, if you can show up front that you made a good faith effort in compliance, in record keeping, in being candid, and engaging experts throughout that process, I think that weaves a narrative that ultimately will protect you, your clients, your business, correct?
I think that's correct. And I just have one little anecdote. I had a family friend reach out to me, I think in April, and she said, hey, I have a lapsed LLC in Las Vegas, and I opened a bank account under that LLC a long time ago, probably 11 years ago. How can I get a PPP loan? And I said, thank you for your question. I would advise against that. I didn't say this, but I wanted to, but what you're requesting me to do is help you commit fraud. But it's always good to just gently let people know in your world that that's probably not a good idea. So.
And that's a great observation too. I came out of the practice of law, moved into higher ed administration, and oftentimes lawyers or legal professionals get the bad rap. And I've always told people that I was never in a situation where another attorney, whether it's a colleague or opposing counsel, ever made me feel like I should do something that was unethical. Oftentimes it was clients who assumed you would or didn't realize their conduct was unethical. So we, more often in my experience, people trained in the law or practicing attorneys are also compliance professionals, and we're notifying people what you're doing could violate the law or be unethical. Some of them go, yeah, I know, but you're the lawyer and I'm going to hire you to help me. But most of the time it's out of ignorance. And that's why, again, tying this back in, you've relayed to us that you just had your 10th anniversary from law school, and congratulations. But that you also chose a role that, while I'm sure your Juris Doctorate, your law degree, benefited you in your current position, or people interested in the compliance field or risk, is it critical that they go to law school, or is a program like this, a master's level program designed by and delivered by a law school, also beneficial?
I think it's completely beneficial. I think my law degree, obviously, I'm so grateful I have it, and I spent a lot of time and effort getting it. I think it was money well spent. But at the same time, a lot of the compliance people I work with are not attorneys. And so I feel like it should not just be that you need to go to law school. A program like this is worthwhile and can help broaden your horizons in the risk and compliance field, and maybe give you additional information and training that maybe you couldn't get on the job, or I just think that you don't necessarily need to go to law school. It's not a requirement. And obviously I'm happy I have one, but I work with a lot of people who are not lawyers.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things about this pandemic, and then when I show this slide again, the key players, people who are the enactors, the legislatures, the drafters of policy, the influencers, the lobbyists, and then the facilitators, people working in financial institutions. We didn't even get into the challenge of cybersecurity and information systems. You mentioned Equifax, but again, that broader understanding of privacy rights and databases and systems management as we try to handle this.
Right.
The recipients, the business owners, and the enforcers, all of these players have a need for compliance and risk professionals, and this kind of program could open up career opportunities or growth within these roles if you are already in these roles, to have this kind of degree path.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I don't know about where people are living right now, but in our state here in Washington, there's guidance literally being issued every day or a couple times a week by the governor. Somebody's writing that guidance. And they're usually going to be compliance and risk people that are going to be writing out these are the rules, this is how you can comply, this is how you can open up your barbershop, all of that stuff. That's all tied in, so.
And again, this is just not going to end with phase one.
No.
Even when we look at the enforcers, the Legislative Commission, I believe their commission is currently runs through the end of fiscal year 2025.
Right.
So we are looking at years of interpretation and then the response and the lessons learned beyond that.
That's right.
So, and so do you find that a program like this is both timely and relevant?
Absolutely. And just in helping create the program, there was, or one of the modules, one of the courses, I saw how much thought was put into, what the students have already learned maybe in a different course and what, how it would apply in a specific track. So I think it's extremely a beneficial area. I just want to say that I get postings every day about, hey, we need these compliance professionals, job postings. I feel like it is such a growth industry. So it's definitely an area of growth. And so having sort of a certificate or something like that that you can show would be extremely beneficial in this, especially in a job environment that we're headed into.
And I know this is a softball question, with you having earned your undergraduate and your law degree from Seattle University, but you work with a lot of attorneys, with consultants, people who've gone to a lot of schools. What is it that you think in your experience with Seattle University, that if someone's trying to weigh different programs, what it is that might set our culture or community apart?
Well, I think that there is a true commitment to justice, equity. There's a real commitment. The Jesuit, there's no religion spoken about at Seattle U, but it is a Jesuit university, and they really stand by those ethics and principles that are set forth by the that area of thought. So I know that a lot of people I've went to school with are so happy with the education they received at Seattle U. So.
And Ali, we have a question that came in from Antonio, and thank you for your question. To clarify, for someone with an undergraduate degree, the Master of Legal Studies, or MLS, is an option instead of law school?
Yes, that's correct.
But what I would say is, if you were to earn this fully online part-time degree, it is a master's degree in law, in legal studies, but it would not enable you to sit for a bar exam or to practice law. So it's an option, but it does not prepare you to be a practicing attorney. I hope that answered your question, Antonio. And what we'd be looking at then is a fully online 30 credit program rather than law school. The American Bar Association that accredits law schools does not permit fully online programs to be accredited. So this fully online program of 30 credits, part-time over 2 years, is distinct from a Juris Doctorate that would normally require approximately 90 credits and a 3-year full-time commitment, or a 4 to 5 year part-time on-campus commitment? We have another question. Do you think that, Professor Higgs or Ali, do you think that in a master's program part-time, that the things that are being learned can help people in their current careers?
Absolutely. Yes. I think the answer is yes. I mean, I feel like what is being taught could really be applicable to any business, any, or nonprofit or area that you're working in. Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, you might have more questions about what your job is, but if you're interested in compliance, usually big corporations especially have a compliance department or sometimes a legal department that takes on folks that know the laws and the rules pretty well and can work there. So if that's an interest to you for a career path, and especially with CILU's program is health law, cyber security, financial, like we're talking about today. There's various areas that might be of interest to you that have to do with compliance and risk management. And if I'm leaving an area of focus off, Linda, let me know.
Oh yeah, actually, and that's one of the things we struggle with too. We love that this program is designed broadly, that a lot of people misunderstand. Even if they choose to go to law school, they think, oh, well, I'm going to learn everything I want about environmental law and come out being an environmental lawyer, where the real goal of a legal or law education is to really see any problem and frame solutions through a legal lens. So you learn, you get the skills to research, interpret law, regardless of industry. And we do have focus, but all of our focuses and concentrations are complementary. For example, if you are a human resource manager in a company, you need to understand health law. You need to understand corporate ethical law. You need to understand cybersecurity. So to think that there's we do not require a concentration. And when we've designed healthcare, corporate compliance focus, financial institutions, and cybersecurity, we realized that all of them kind of merged into knowing just the broader, being able to see an ecosystem of risk and compliance and building, breaking down silos and building a culture, regardless of whether you're one of those players, an enforcer, a facilitator, and an actor. And to be able to transcend that and be collaborative both with internal and external departments and be leaders. Our current students, I can say, come from myriad backgrounds and all add value to the classroom and add novel approaches and share anecdotes and real-time experiences in their work. Some are officers in credit unions, some come out of the maritime industry, some in aerospace, and contract management, quality assurance, and cybersecurity, or people who are not in this career space and want to transition. Some of our students already have law degrees and realize that they didn't want to be practicing attorneys, but wanted to move into corporate compliance or more legislative, and realized they had a gap in their education, that law school did not prepare them for risk assessment other than maybe litigation risk. So we have a lot of different students who also enrich the program. Similarly, Ali, as you know, many of our students come out of this space and have a lot of undergraduate degrees. They may be 10 years into out of earning their undergraduate. They may have certifications or licenses, but they don't have a graduate degree. And they realize that to advance in their careers, maybe move up in the leadership chain or transition, that they would benefit from a master's. And those are the people we hope to serve. So, next steps, I would encourage all of those in attendance, if you haven't, to apply. We have waived our application fee. It's an easy process. An application helps you to explore these opportunities and to enter into a dialogue. Our admissions committee meets on a rolling basis, usually once a week. Normally you receive a response accepting or asking for more information within a week or two of an application. The process does ask for official transcripts, but those do not have to be submitted at the time of the application or at the time an offer is made. So it's a pretty easy process, and we would encourage you to apply online. You can contact us at any time, both before or after applying, to discuss the academic plan, your professional goals, and any financial aid opportunities. I promise that even though we're working remotely, we do respond promptly to all inquiries. And then we would hope that you would begin your journey with us. What are some key dates? Priority deadline to apply is June 1st. Again, we will accept applications after that, but for a priority consideration to assure your spot in the fall start of September 8th, we encourage an application by June 1st, or at least that you start the application by June 1st. But I'm available at any time. If I cannot answer your question, I will find a team member that can. But I really like to hear your stories, and we would hope that you would apply, you would join our team, and you would be able to call Ali a colleague, not just professor, but eventually a colleague.
All right.
Professor Higgs, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I just really appreciate the time that you've given to me today, and I hope that what I've said today is interesting and inspires you to apply. So, there you go.
And even if it doesn't, that inspires them to go back to our friends and our family and our
Yes.
colleagues that are impacted by this with some more information. And
Absolutely.
just being reassured. One of the things you did say today is, because I'm watching the news, and regardless of people's political leanings, we're all in scary times, but you've allayed some of our concerns that there's a lot of things we're doing right.
Yeah.
And we have some opportunities, obviously opportunities for improvement, but there's a lot of things we're getting right, both from the government side all the way down to the recipient side.
That's
And
right.
that gives me reassurance too.
Good.
So thank you so much for your expertise, Ali, for your contributions to our attendees today and to Seattle University. I wish you and all of attendees, your families, continued health and wellness. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I am stopping recording and ending our webinar.
Okay.